So Proverbs 30 says, "Three things are too wonderful for me, four I do not understand: the way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas, and the way of a man with a virgin. This is the way of an adulteress. She eats and wipes her mouth and says, I have done no wrong." So today we're looking at, I don't really get this. I don't get this. And we're looking at verses 18 through 20 in Proverbs chapter 3. Now, let's take a look at the first point is Agur says that there are things that are too wonderful or beyond his comprehension. They all have this common connection. That's what he's saying here, that all things that he's mentioning here have this common connection that he does not, he doesn't understand. They're too wonderful for him. They're beyond his comprehension of how these things work. So it is a fact that they do what they do, but they don't leave a trace, and that's the commonality. He's saying here that they do things, whatever it is that he's talking about, but there's no trace afterwards, right? That's one of the common things amongst all of these. Because I remember our idea or our goal in these proverbs is to figure out why are these things too wonderful? Why doesn't he? What is he talking about? He doesn't understand. And talks about the eagle in the sky, the way of serpent on the rock, the way of a ship on the high seas. Those are the ones that we're supposed to be easily find the connection there. What are the things connected together? And most people, most commentators throughout the church history here have said, well, he doesn't understand how these things do something. They like the eagle flies in the sky, but there's no trace, because we're going to get to verse 20 there, and that's kind of how these things are all tied together too. He's like, how does that happen? Then he gets to serpent on a rock. It climbs on the rock, but then there's no trace of it, and so that's what we're getting at. So let's look at the first example here. Example 1 is the eagle in the sky. So the flight of an eagle, such a huge bird, is a sight really to behold. You ever seen an eagle, or even some of these bigger birds like falcons or hawks? It's an amazing thing in and of itself to watch these things fly. It's a huge, big animal, right? But yet it can take to the sky. It flies through the sky. It's flying around. This big thing is able to navigate the sky, but it leaves no trace behind when it's done that. There's no trace of birds flying in the sky. Like, that'd be kind of weird. But, we know that. You look in the sky, even the biggest animal that flies through the sky, it's not leaving a trace. It's not like the jets that go overhead that leave behind contrails or something like that. Birds can fly all day in the air, and you don't see it. In Proverbs 23, 4 through 5, we find wisdom telling us that the way of money is like the way of an eagle. Do not toil to acquire wealth. Be discerning enough to desist. When your eyes light on it, it is gone, for suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle toward heaven. That's the point here too. It's like it has wings and it flies away. You don't even see it. There's no trace of it again. That's what he's saying what happens with money. Your money, if you're striving after money all the time, eventually it sprouts wings and it flies away like an eagle. Oh, where'd it go? I don't know. You can't trace it. It's gone. Because it's an eagle. It flew away. There's no trace in the sky. It's just disappeared. That's what happens to your money. So you can kind of see here that same idea. The eagle flies and you don't know what happens to it. You can't track it, right? Now, example 2 is the serpent on the rock. The movement of a serpent without legs is really an amazing sight to see. I mean, think about how serpents can kind of slither, and you don't have any legs. It's like most things move with legs or some kind of thing, but just the way it slithers, it's able to move without them. Now, what connects with the examples is that a serpent that slithers on a rock specifically leaves behind no trace again. So yeah, it doesn't say like if it's in the sand, it's going to leave marks. You can trace a serpent, a snake that's in grass and in dirt and sand. You can find that, but specifically here it says the way of a snake on a rock is pretty amazing. So you have no clue that the snake's been there. It's able to still navigate that, but then it's gone. You can't trace that because it's on the rock and doesn't leave behind any kind of lasting marks. Now, example 3 is the ship on the sea. Again, a ship on the high seas is a sight to behold. We probably take it for granted most of the time, but if you think about those giant cruise ships or the freighters that have all those cargo containers on it, it's so much weight. It's amazing how much weight they put on these ships. But yet they're able to float in the water. And so in and of itself, it's an amazing thing to behold, right? It's like, wow, how's it doing that? Like, why is it doing that? But then also the other tie is that after, well, like you throw a pebble in the water, it sinks to the bottom. But a ship that weighs tons is able to float across the top of the water. The ship carves its way through the waters, yet after the weight disappears, there's no trace. No trace that the mighty ship has passed. And so the next example can be tricky in how to interpret the enigma, though. If we directly link the end of verse 19 with verse 20, which comes after that, talking about the adulteress, then Agar is talking about sexual sin in the fourth example of things that are impossible for him to understand. But if we keep 19 separated from 20, verse 19 is still talking about sexuality, but in a good way. So the ESV translators have opted for the separation, because you'll notice that they put it into a separate paragraph. So if you look at ESV, they have 20 as a separate paragraph altogether. Now, some translations have 18 through 20 all together in one, as if verse 20 is the explanation for the end of verse 19. And so it depends on where you put this separation at. There are more views, including this, that this whole section is about Jesus, and the virgin or Alma mentioned here is Mary. But for me, that's quite a stretch. Again, that's, people were, I don't think that's what it's talking about here. I think it's talking about, well, let me just look at it. Let's take what Agur says, and then I'll let you decide. Now, the way of a man with a virgin, that's the phrase. If we opt for this being a good and positive example, then Agar would be talking about marital love, right? If it's good and positive, it's got to be about marital love. The young woman and man mentioned here would be engaging in love, like we saw in Proverbs chapter 5. Right, that's what we're talking about, marital love, which is good, and so that's fine. Or something like Song of Solomon, you'll be getting something like that. So Song of Solomon says in 5:1, "Eat, friends, drink, and be drunk with love." Married romantic love is something that is too wonderful and something he does not understand. Maybe that's what Agar is saying. If that's a good example, if this is I don't understand how that happens. I don't understand how this is, what it is. It's so great. It's amazing. So how will we link it to verse 20? If we link 19 to 20, if this is all kind of, it is in the context, obviously, right? It's the next verse where he's talking about something bad. Then this is talking about a young man that has seduced a young unmarried woman and has caused her to sin. Looking at verse 20, we find Agar speaking about an adulteress who, after committing adultery, simply shrugs off her sin with no apparent consequences. Much like a person who eats a meal and then wipes their mouth afterwards, there's no evidence that they actually ate anything. It's just gone. A sin that was committed, though it is a sin that should lead to death, right, as the law says that those who commit adultery ought to die, the adulteress does that, wipes her mouth, figuratively, and then walks away without any apparent consequences. So is this a good thing? Is this a negative thing? Is that what he's talking about there? Is this talking? Yeah. So I would say it's one of those. Both of them are, make sense in the context. Both of them. If you're going to look at, it's kind of weird then, like verse 20 then becomes just kind of separate. It's kind of disjointed. Why just throw that in there? Why is that in that spot? Because other ones, the rest of of Agar's chapter here kind of flows together. It kind of makes sense. Okay, you're talking about these things. You're talking about, because really in this section about sin that he's talking about, after he talks about God and how he wants to get to know God better, and God's word is always true, and then he talks about this evil generation of people who curse their fathers and not bless their mothers, and goes through, and then he talks about the leech is always saying give. All these things are never satisfied. Kind of like people, kind of like sinful people are never satisfied. Sin is never satisfied. And then he gets to saying, well, then goes back to the idea that there's a sin, there's this, they get or never get enough, and then they scorn their mother, and they mock their fathers. They're never getting enough, right? They're the leech. And then he gets into the next part where there's three things too wonderful for me, for I do not understand. And he talks about those things. Now, it could be this is a transition here where it's talking about good things now, or it could be talking about, he's still on the idea of bad things. Like these are bad things that happen, and it's not good. So, because later on, he's going to talk about the small things and the stately things. And those are all good things. There's nothing sinful in there. He's talking about this. He's just making an observation that these things are small, but yet great and exceedingly wise. And there's some things things that are stately in their stride. They're stately in their stride. That's what they should do. So there's that idea there. But where's that transition from good to bad? That's the question we have. I would say probably it's talking negatively. That's what I would go with, but I won't dogmatically sit on that one. So you can take either side and I think be okay, because it still makes sense with the rest of it. You just have to say, well, he doesn't understand how, he doesn't understand marital love, how great it is. And then would say in verse 20, and he also doesn't understand then how an adulteress gets away with what she's doing. Either way, that's what he's saying, basically, is that the adulteress does what she does, and just there's no trace. It just seems like she gets away with it. Of course, we know God says that he will punish all evil, but that's what it's like. This is too wonderful. This like wonderful meant being good, but wonderful being like, I just don't understand this. Why does this happen? I don't understand these things. So, if you're talking about wonderful being good, then obviously 20 is a little out of place because it's a negative. But that's what we got. So let's stop there for today, because that's the end of that section. And we'll look at the next section next time we get together. So I'll see you back then.